Cast aside, used for cash, called confused. I launched a calm counterattack, one decision that shocked them and proved who was really in control. I was standing at my front door, suitcase packed and passport in hand, when my phone buzzed with a message that would shatter everything I thought I knew about family. The notification sound seemed louder than usual in the quiet hallway, cutting through my excitement like a blade through silk. I'd been humming an old melody, the kind my wife used to sing when she was alive, while double-checking my travel documents one final time. The anticipation had been building for months. European vacation plans spread across my kitchen table like a treasure map, restaurant recommendations printed and highlighted, museum tickets purchased in advance, hotel confirmations neatly organized in a folder that now felt heavier than it should. I'd researched walking tours through cobblestone streets, imagined sharing gelato with my daughter in Rome, pictured us laughing over wine in a Parisian cafe. But when I read those words on my phone screen, the world tilted sideways. You are not joining us. My husband thinks it's better if this stays family only. The message glowed against the black screen, each word burning itself into my memory. I read it once, then twice, my thumb hovering over the keyboard as I tried to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal how deeply those words had cut. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The silence in my house became deafening. Minutes earlier, I'd been checking the weather forecast for Paris, mentally planning which jacket to pack for those cool European evenings. Now, I stood frozen in my entryway, luggage at my feet like abandoned dreams. The grandfather clock in my living room ticked with mechanical precision, each sound echoing off walls that suddenly felt too close, too empty. Family only. The phrase repeated itself in my mind like a broken record player stuck on the worst possible song. I was her father. I had raised her, supported her, walked her down the aisle at her wedding. I had been there for scraped knees and broken hearts, graduation ceremonies and job interviews. When had I stopped being family and become something else entirely? My legs felt unsteady as I made my way to the kitchen, setting my phone down on the granite countertop I had installed myself 3 years ago. The same countertop where I'd spread out those European travel brochures, circling restaurants and marking must-see attractions with the enthusiasm of someone half my age. The coffee maker gurgled in the background, but the sound felt distant, muffled by the cotton wool of shock that seemed to fill my ears. I poured myself a cup with hands that trembled slightly, the ceramic mug warm against my palms. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Henderson next door, watering her prize-winning roses. Normal life continuing its predictable rhythm while my world crumbled in real time. A jogger passed by on the sidewalk, earbuds in, completely unaware that someone's heart was breaking just 20 feet away. The logical part of my brain tried to make sense of what had happened. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe the hotel had mixed up the reservations. Maybe Todd, my son-in-law, had simply panicked about the expense and didn't know how to tell me directly. But deep down, in that place where truth lives before we dress it up with explanations, I knew this was deliberate. I walked back to my suitcase, still sitting by the front door like a faithful dog waiting for a walk that would never come. The clothes inside were folded with care, each item chosen for specific occasions I'd imagined. The blue button-down shirt for dinner at that restaurant Lindsay had found near the Louvre. The comfortable walking shoes for exploring Roman ruins. The lightweight jacket for evening strolls along the Seine. My phone rang, cutting through the heavy silence. The caller ID showed Lindsay's name, and for a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe she was calling to explain, to apologize, to tell me this was all a terrible mistake. I answered on the third ring, my voice steadier than I felt. Dad, I know you got my message. Her tone was matter-of-fact, almost businesslike. No warmth, no regret, just efficient communication. I did. I'm trying to understand what happened. There was a pause, and I could hear background noise on her end. Airport announcements, the rumble of suitcase wheels on tile floors. She was already there, already beginning the adventure I'd helped plan but would never experience. Todd's parents decided to join us at the last minute. It just makes more sense to keep it to immediate family. Immediate family. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into my favorite armchair, the leather creaking under my weight. And I'm not immediate family? You know what I mean, Dad. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. But I didn't know what she meant. I didn't understand how the man who had held her as a baby, who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had paid for her college education and her wedding, could suddenly be excluded from immediate family. The confusion must have shown in my voice. Lindsay, I've been looking forward to this trip for months. We planned it together. I know, and I'm sorry about the timing, but Todd thinks it would be better if you stayed home this time. Todd thinks. Not we think, not I think, but Todd thinks. My daughter's voice had taken on a tone I'd heard before, the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news they didn't want to discuss, like a doctor explaining a terminal diagnosis or a bank manager foreclosing on a loan. I found myself staring at the family photos lining my mantelpiece, pictures spanning decades, documenting birthdays and holidays, graduations and anniversaries. In every single one, I was present, smiling, engaged, part of the story. When had I become a supporting character in my own daughter's life? What exactly does Todd think would be better about me staying home? Another pause, longer this time. I could hear her shifting, probably looking around the airport terminal, checking the departure board, calculating how much of this conversation she had to endure before boarding. He just thinks it might be more relaxing without having to worry about accommodating different interests and energy levels. Different energy levels. The euphemism hung in the air between us like smoke. What she meant was that I was old, that I would slow them down, that my presence would be an inconvenience rather than a joy. The 68-year-old man who had raised her single-handedly after her mother died was now too much of a burden to include in family activities. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood I'd lived in for 30 years. The same streets where I'd taught Lindsay to drive, where she'd brought Todd to meet me for the first time, where she'd announced her engagement with tears of happiness in her eyes. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. I see, I said, though I didn't see anything clearly anymore. Dad, please don't be upset. We'll plan something else when we get back. Maybe a nice dinner somewhere local. A nice dinner somewhere local. A consolation prize for the father who no longer fit into the main event. I felt something harden in my chest, a protective shell forming around the soft parts of my heart that had been damaged beyond repair. Have a wonderful trip, Lindsay. Dad, I ended the call before she could finish, setting the phone down with deliberate care. The house settled back into silence, but it felt different now. Not peaceful, but hollow. Like a stage after the actors have left and the audience has gone home. Walking back to my suitcase, I began the process of unpacking dreams I'd carried for months. Each item of clothing felt heavier than it should, weighted with the expectations I'd attached to it. The guidebooks went back on the shelf. The foreign currency I'd exchanged went into my desk drawer. The camera I'd bought specifically for this trip returned to its box. But as I folded away the last of my travel clothes, something unexpected happened. Instead of the crushing despair I'd anticipated, I felt a strange lightness creeping into my chest. For the first time in years, I had no obligations to anyone but myself. No schedules to coordinate, no compromises to make, no careful navigation of family dynamics. I was free. The realization should have been terrifying for a man who'd spent decades defining himself through service to others. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in years. I looked around my house, really looked at it, seeing it not as a waiting room for the next family gathering, but as a place that belonged entirely to me. My phone buzzed again, but this time I didn't rush to answer it. Whatever crisis or guilt trip or manipulation awaited me in that message could wait. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was going to put my own needs first. The afternoon sun slanted through my living room windows, painting everything in golden light. Outside, the world continued its relentless march forward, but inside my house, time seemed to slow down. I made myself a proper lunch, something more substantial than the quick sandwiches I usually ate. I put on music, something I enjoyed rather than what others might prefer. And slowly, carefully, I began to consider what freedom might actually look like for a man who'd forgotten he deserved it. The freedom felt intoxicating at first, like stepping out of a stuffy room into fresh air. But as the hours passed, reality began to settle in with uncomfortable weight. I found myself checking social media, scrolling through vacation photos that hadn't been posted yet, refreshing feeds that showed nothing but ordinary Tuesday afternoon updates from friends and neighbors. Then I saw it, a notification that made my blood run cold. Todd's father, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, grinning at the camera with that satisfied expression of someone who'd won a game I didn't even know we were playing. The timestamp showed it was posted just 2 hours ago. My hands began to shake as I clicked on the profile to see more. There they were, all 4 of them. Todd's parents, Todd and Lindsay, clustered together at a sidewalk cafe in what was unmistakably Paris. Wine glasses on the table, that golden afternoon light that only exists in European cities, painting their faces with warmth and contentment. Lindsay's caption made my stomach drop like a stone thrown into deep water. So grateful for family time in the city of light with the people who matter most. The people who matter most. I counted the faces in the photo with trembling fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not 5, never 5. The mathematical certainty of my exclusion hit me harder than any words could have. I set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode if handled roughly. The living room around me felt different now, smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. Through my window I could see the Johnsons loading their car for what looked like a family road trip. Normal families doing normal things together. No one was being carefully, deliberately excluded from their adventures. The betrayal came in waves, each one stronger than the last. This wasn't a last-minute decision about Todd's parents joining them. This had been planned, orchestrated. They had discussed my exclusion, weighed the pros and cons of my presence, and decided I was more trouble than I was worth. The realization that my own daughter had participated in this conspiracy made breathing difficult. I walked to my home office, drawn by some instinct I couldn't name. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades. Lindsay's first steps taken right here in this house. Her high school graduation, where I'd been so proud I'd embarrassed her with my enthusiastic cheering. Her wedding day, where I'd walked her down the aisle with tears streaming down my face. In every single photograph, I was present, engaged, part of the story. My hands slowly clenched into fists as I stared at these images of a relationship I'd apparently misunderstood completely. The man in these pictures looked happy, fulfilled, surrounded by love. But that man had been living in a carefully constructed illusion, hadn't he? I pulled out my desk drawer and found the folder I'd been unconsciously avoiding. 5 years of bank statements, credit card bills, canceled checks. The paper trail of my generosity spread across my desk like evidence at a crime scene. The down payment for their house, $47,000 from my retirement savings, the car payments I'd taken over when Todd lost his first job, the credit card debt I'd absorbed when they couldn't make ends meet, the European vacation fund I'd been building for months, the money that had bought their tickets to Paris while I sat alone in my house processing their betrayal. But it wasn't just the money. I remembered the sacrifices that went deeper than dollars. The fishing trip with my college buddies I'd canceled because Lindsay needed help moving. The woman from my book club who'd asked me to dinner. I'd said no because Lindsay needed babysitting for a work event that turned out to be optional. My own dreams consistently postponed while I funded theirs. The pattern was so clear now I couldn't believe I'd missed it for so long. Sunday dinners where Todd barely acknowledged my presence. Holiday gatherings where I felt like an outsider in conversations about people and places I didn't know. The subtle ways he'd made me feel unwelcome in their lives while simultaneously accepting my financial support. They'd never invited me to join their world. They'd invited me to fund it. My phone rang, cutting through the heavy silence of my office. Lindsay's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a surge of something I didn't recognize. Not hope this time. Something harder and colder. "Dad, I saw you liked Todd's father's photo on Facebook." Her voice carried a note of caution, like someone testing the temperature of water before diving in. I hadn't realized I'd liked anything, but apparently my thumb had betrayed my surveillance. "Just curious about how the family vacation was going." "Dad, please don't make this weird. We're having a lovely time." "I'm sure you are." Todd's parents seemed to be enjoying themselves. A pause. I could hear the background noise of a bustling European street, the kind of authentic travel experience I had dreamed of sharing with my daughter. "Look, I know this is awkward, but Todd's parents are really easy to travel with. They don't need constant attention or special accommodations. Constant attention, special accommodations. Each phrase felt like a small knife, precisely placed to cause maximum damage. In her mind, I'd become a burden rather than a companion, an obligation rather than a joy. I understand completely, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Do you because you sound angry? I'm not angry, Lindsay. I'm learning. Learning what? I looked around my office at the photographs, the bank statements, the evidence of a relationship built on my usefulness rather than my worth. For the first time in years, everything was perfectly clear. I'm learning the difference between being loved and being needed. The silence on her end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice had taken on that edge I'd heard too often lately. That's not fair, Dad. You know I love you. Do I? Of course you do. This is just one vacation. We'll plan something else when we get back. Will we? My phone buzzed with a banking notification, the familiar ping that usually meant a routine transaction. But something made me check it, while Lindsay continued talking about future plans that sounded increasingly hollow. The notification made my jaw clench. Liberté Restaurant, Paris, France, €745. Lindsay had used my credit card, the one I'd given her years ago for emergencies when she was struggling to build credit. They'd excluded me from their family vacation, but were using my money to pay for their fancy Parisian meals. The irony was so complete, it was almost beautiful. While Todd's parents supposedly paid their own way and didn't expect constant financial support, my daughter was charging their romantic dinners to my account. While I sat alone in my house, processing their betrayal, they were toasting their success with wine purchased on my credit card. Dad, are you still there? I'm here, I said, scrolling through recent transactions with growing amazement. Hotel charges, shopping boutiques, tourist attractions, all on my card, all while they celebrated their family-only vacation. Good, because I want you to understand that this isn't personal. It feels pretty personal from here. You're being dramatic. It's just one trip. Another notification pinged on my screen. €850 at Boutique Chic Paris. She was shopping for souvenirs while I sat in my kitchen, absorbing the reality of how little I meant to them. Lindsay, I need to go. Dad, please don't hang up angry. We can talk about this when I get back. But I was already opening my banking app, navigating to the section I'd avoided for too long. Authorized users. Lindsay's name sat there in black digital letters, representing years of financial access I'd granted out of love and received manipulation in return. Have a wonderful rest of your trip, I said. Dad, don't you dare! I ended the call and stared at my phone screen. The confirmation button waited for my decision like a doorway to a different life. Years of being the supportive father warred with the growing certainty that support and exploitation were different things entirely. My finger hovered over the screen for just a moment. Then, with movements more decisive than I'd felt in years, I removed Lindsay's access to my accounts. The confirmation message appeared instantly. Authorized user access revoked. For the first time since receiving that devastating text message, I smiled. The coffee maker gurgled to life in my kitchen as I made myself a proper dinner. Not the quick sandwiches or frozen meals I'd been living on, but something that required attention and care. The kind of meal I used to make when I cooked for someone who appreciated the effort. Tonight, I was cooking for someone who deserved it. As I chopped vegetables and seasoned meat, my phone remained silent on the counter. No urgent calls, no guilt-inducing texts, no emotional manipulation designed to restore the status quo. Just blessed, liberating silence. Through my kitchen window, I watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring consequences, I knew. Angry phone calls and tearful confrontations, threats and ultimatums designed to force me back into my role as the family's personal bank account. But tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was cooking dinner for someone who mattered, someone whose dreams and needs and dignity deserved consideration. I was cooking for myself. The realization should have felt selfish. Instead, it felt like coming home after a very long journey to a place I'd forgotten existed, a place where I was wanted rather than merely useful, where my presence was a gift rather than a burden. where I was finally genuinely free. The morning after my small victory with the credit card felt different. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom curtains with unusual brightness, and for the first time in months, I'd slept through the night without waking up worried about someone else's problems. My coffee tasted better, my shower felt more refreshing, and even my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked somehow more substantial. I was buttering my toast when my phone exploded with activity. The first call came at 8:17. Lindsay's name flashed on the screen with that desperate persistence that meant trouble. I let it ring through to voicemail, taking another sip of coffee while listening to the distant sound of European chaos filtering through my kitchen walls. The voicemail was exactly what I'd expected, her voice sharp with panic and embarrassment. "Dad, what did you do to my card? I tried to pay for breakfast and it was declined in front of everyone. Todd's parents think we can't manage our finances. You need to fix this immediately." I deleted the message without a second thought and returned to my newspaper. The local section had a story about the community garden project I'd donated to last year. My name was listed among the contributors, and seeing it there reminded me that I'd once been someone who built things instead of just funding other people's dreams. The second call came 10 minutes later. This time I answered, curious to hear what new manipulation she'd crafted during those 10 minutes of European panic. "Dad, thank God you picked up. There's been some kind of mistake with my card access." "No mistake," I said calmly, folding the newspaper to the crossword puzzle. "I removed your authorized user privileges." The silence stretched so long I wondered if she'd dropped the phone. When she finally spoke, her voice had climbed an octave. "You can't do that. I need that card. What if there's an emergency? Then you'll handle it like the independent adult you claim to be." "This is ridiculous. I'm your daughter." "Are you? Because yesterday you made it very clear that I'm not family." I could hear muffled conversation in the background, Todd's voice rising in what sounded like angry consultation. The image of them huddled together in some Parisian cafe, frantically trying to figure out how to pay for their family-only vacation, brought a satisfaction I hadn't expected to feel. "Dad, you're being completely unreasonable. We're stuck here without access to funds. You have your own credit cards. Use those. They're maxed out from the trip expenses." The admission hung in the air like a confession. All this time, they'd been living beyond their means while using my financial safety net as their personal insurance policy. My retirement savings had been subsidizing their lifestyle while they complained about my presence being inconvenient. That sounds like poor financial planning. "Dad, please, just restore my access until we get home and we can discuss this properly." "We can discuss it now. Tell me about Todd's parents joining the family vacation at the last minute." Another pause. I could practically hear her calculating how much truth she could afford to reveal. It wasn't really last minute. They'd been planning to come for a while. "How long is a while, Lindsay?" "A few weeks. So when we were planning this trip together, when I was researching restaurants and booking tours, you already knew I was going to be excluded." "It wasn't like that." "What was it like?" The background noise shifted and I realized they were walking somewhere, probably searching for an ATM or a bank that might help them access emergency funds. The desperation in their movements was almost audible through the phone. Todd thought it might be awkward with both sets of parents. "Both sets of parents? Is that what I am now? Just another set of parents to be managed?" "You know what I mean. I'm learning that I don't know what anything means anymore. For instance, I don't know what it means when someone uses my credit card to pay for a vacation I'm not invited to." The sharp intake of breath told me she hadn't expected me to check the transaction so quickly. In her mind, I was probably still the trusting father who paid bills without reading them, who provided support without asking questions. "Dad, those were legitimate expenses. For a family vacation that excluded family." "You're twisting everything." "Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you wanted my money but not my company. You wanted my financial support but not my presence. You wanted me to pay for a vacation I wasn't allowed to enjoy." The honesty in my own voice surprised me. For years I'd swallowed these observations, pushing them down in the name of keeping peace. But peace at what cost? And peace for whom? "That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what fair would look like." I stood up from my kitchen table and walked to my home office, where bank statements and receipts still covered my desk, like evidence in a trial I was finally ready to prosecute. Fair would be acknowledging that I've supported you financially for years without complaint. Fair would be including me in decisions about trips I'm helping to fund. Fair would be treating me like a person instead of a bank account with inconvenient emotions attached. Dad, you're being dramatic. I'm being honest, probably for the first time in years. I could hear Todd's voice more clearly now, his tone sharp with the kind of panic that comes from realizing your safety net has developed holes. Good. Let him panic. Let them both discover what it felt like to be responsible for their own choices. Look, we'll discuss this when we get home. Right now, we need access to emergency funds. Emergency funds for what? Shopping, expensive dinners, tourist attractions? For basic travel expenses. Then use your basic travel budget, the one you should have planned before taking a vacation you couldn't afford. Dad, please, we're family. Are we? Because yesterday you made it very clear that family means something different to you than it does to me. The desperation in her voice was becoming more pronounced, and I found myself wondering if this was how she'd always sounded when asking for money. Had I been so eager to help that I'd missed the manipulation in her tone? What do you want from me? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? For months I'd been focused on what others wanted from me, what they needed, what would make them happy. The concept of my own wants felt foreign, almost selfish. But as I sat in my office, surrounded by evidence of my own generosity, the answer came with startling clarity. I want to be treated with respect. I want to be valued for more than my bank balance. I want to be included in family decisions that affect me. And I want you to understand that love isn't something you can withdraw like money from an ATM. Of course I love you. Do you, or do you love what I provide? The question hung in the air between us, transmitted across thousands of miles of ocean and decades of accumulated resentment. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her standing on some European street corner, finally confronting a truth she'd been avoiding. Dad, that's not a fair question. It's the only question that matters. I ended the call before she could respond, setting my phone down with hands that were steadier than they'd been in months. Outside my window, Mrs. Peterson was working in her garden, the picture of contentment as she tended to flowers that would bloom because she cared for them properly. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. I'd been tending to a relationship that had stopped blooming years ago, pouring time and money and emotional energy into something that had grown toxic despite my best efforts. Maybe it was time to tend to something else. My phone buzzed with a text message, probably Lindsay trying a different approach to the same manipulation. I glanced at it without opening it. Whatever guilt or anger or false promises waited in that message could wait indefinitely. For the first time in years, I was more interested in my own thoughts than in managing someone else's crisis. I walked through my house with new eyes, seeing it not as a staging area for family gatherings that might never come, but as a space that belonged entirely to me. The furniture I'd chosen, the books I'd collected, the photographs that told my story rather than serving someone else's narrative. In my bedroom, I opened the closet where my travel clothes still hung from yesterday's aborted packing session, the blue shirt I'd chosen for Parisian dinners, the comfortable walking shoes for cobblestone streets, the lightweight jacket for evening strolls I'd never take. But instead of sadness, I felt something unexpected. Possibility. These clothes could still take me places, maybe not to Europe with people who didn't want me there, but somewhere else entirely. Somewhere chosen for my own reasons, on my own timeline, with people who actually enjoyed my company. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new browser window. Travel destinations for seniors, I typed, then deleted it. The word seniors felt like a limitation I was no longer willing to accept. Instead, I typed adventure travel for people who've earned their freedom. The search results filled my screen with possibilities I'd never considered. River rafting in Colorado, photography tours in New Mexico, wine tasting in California, archaeological expeditions in Arizona, adventures designed for people with the wisdom to appreciate them and the resources to enjoy them properly. My phone rang again, but I didn't even glance at it. Whatever crisis Lindsay and Todd were manufacturing in their European paradise could wait. Right now, I was busy planning the first vacation of my life that was truly mine. The Grand Canyon had always fascinated me, but I'd never visited because family trips always went to theme parks or beach resorts, places chosen for maximum appeal to the largest number of people. Now I could spend a week hiking those ancient trails, staying in a lodge overlooking landscapes that had been carved by patience and persistence. Like me, I realized, shaped by decades of steady erosion until something beautiful and permanent emerged. I found a tour company that specialized in small group adventures for people over 50. The testimonials spoke of rediscovered independence, new friendships formed over campfires, and the profound satisfaction of proving to yourself that age was just a number. The credit card that had been funding someone else's European adventure could fund my own American discovery instead. I was reaching for my phone to call the tour company when it rang in my hand. Lindsay's name again, but this time I answered with genuine curiosity about what new angle she'd discovered. "Dad, we need to talk seriously." Her voice had changed. The panic was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more calculating. "I'm listening." "Todd and I have been discussing your recent behavior, and we're concerned about your mental state." Mental state. The phrase landed like a chess piece being moved into position for checkmate. I leaned back in my office chair, suddenly alert to the game being played. What kind of concerns? Erratic financial decisions, impulsive behavior, isolating yourself from family. These could be early signs of dementia or other cognitive issues. The audacity was breathtaking. They'd excluded me from their vacation, used my money to pay for their luxury meals, and now they were questioning my mental competence because I'd finally said no. "I see. And what do you recommend for these cognitive issues?" "We think you should see a doctor when we get back. Maybe consider assisted living arrangements where professionals can help you make better decisions." Assisted living. The threat was clear and devastating. They wanted to have me declared incompetent so they could control my assets while warehousing me somewhere convenient. The vacation exclusion wasn't just about their comfort. It was about positioning themselves as my responsible caregivers while I played the role of confused elderly parent. "That's very thoughtful of you." "Dad, we're only thinking of your welfare." "Are you? Because it sounds like you're thinking of my bank account." "That's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that worries us." The manipulation was so elegant, I almost admired its construction. Any resistance I offered would be framed as evidence of my declining mental state. Any independence I showed would be labeled as confusion. Any financial decision that didn't benefit them would be proof of my incompetence. "Well, you don't need to worry about that anymore." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm planning to spend my money on myself for a change, starting with a trip to the Grand Canyon." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd fainted. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "Dad, you cannot make major travel decisions without consulting us." "Watch me. We'll contest any financial decisions you make while you're clearly not thinking rationally." "Good luck with that." I ended the call and immediately opened my browser to the tour company website. The Grand Canyon adventure was scheduled to depart in 2 weeks. Perfect timing for someone who just discovered that freedom was the best revenge. I filled out the registration form with hands that grew steadier with each line. Emergency contact information went to my neighbor Mrs. Peterson instead of my daughter. Dietary restrictions? None. Special accommodations needed? None. Just a man ready to rediscover what it meant to choose his own adventure. The confirmation email arrived within minutes, along with a packing list and travel itinerary that filled me with the kind of excitement I'd forgotten was possible. This wasn't someone else's dream that I was funding. This was mine. My phone buzzed with another text from Lindsay, but I deleted it without reading it. Whatever threats or guilt trips or false medical concerns she was crafting could wait until I returned from my own family vacation. A family of one, finally free to explore the world on his own terms. The evening light slanted through my windows as I began making a different kind of packing list. Not for a European vacation that would never happen, but for an American adventure that absolutely would. Hiking boots instead of dress shoes, a camera for landscapes instead of family photos that would never be taken. And for the first time in years, I was packing for someone who actually wanted me there. Me. The next morning brought news that shattered even my newfound sense of control. I was sipping coffee and reviewing my Grand Canyon itinerary when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice belonged to Marcus Chen, a real estate agent who'd handled the sale of my neighbor's house last year. "Mr. Owens, I hope you don't mind me calling directly." Your daughter Lindsay contacted me yesterday about listing your property. She mentioned you'd discussed selling and moving into senior care. The coffee mug nearly slipped from my hands. I haven't discussed anything of the sort. A pause. Oh, she seemed quite certain. Said she had power of attorney and was handling your affairs due to health concerns. Power of attorney. The words hit me like a physical blow. Lindsay was already moving to have me declared incompetent, trying to seize control of my assets while positioning herself as my concerned caregiver. The European vacation hadn't just been about excluding me. It had been about establishing a narrative of my declining mental state. Mr. Chen, I am completely competent to handle my own affairs. I haven't authorized anyone to sell my property. I see. Well, she was quite insistent. Mentioned something about erratic behavior and financial mismanagement. She wanted to schedule a consultation for this week. I thanked Marcus and hung up, my mind racing. Lindsay wasn't just angry about losing access to my credit card. She was orchestrating a complete takeover of my life. The assisted living threats hadn't been emotional manipulation. They'd been a preview of her actual plan. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, probably Lindsay using a different approach. Instead of her name, the message came from something called European Emergency Contact. Neti. Dad, we're flying home early. Todd's parents are concerned about your mental health after our conversation yesterday. We've scheduled an intervention with Dr. Morrison on Friday. Please don't make any major decisions until we can discuss your care needs in person. An intervention, as if my decision to stop funding their lifestyle was evidence of mental illness rather than long overdue common sense. As if standing up for myself was a symptom that required medical treatment. I walked to my home office and pulled out the folder containing my important documents. Birth certificate, social security card, medical records, financial statements. Everything was in order. Everything documented my complete mental competency. But I knew that wouldn't matter if Lindsay could convince a doctor that my recent behavior represented cognitive decline. The pattern was becoming clear with terrifying precision. First, establish that I was becoming difficult and unpredictable. Second, create a paper trail of concerning incidents like cutting off her credit card access. Third, bring in medical professionals who would see an elderly man making irrational financial decisions and recommend protective intervention. It was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential effectiveness. I called my attorney, Robert Harrison, a man I'd known for 15 years through various real estate transactions and will updates. His secretary put me through immediately when I explained it was urgent. Gary, what's got you calling on a Wednesday morning? I explained the situation as clearly as possible, trying to keep emotion out of my voice while conveying the urgency. Robert listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. This is more common than you'd think, he said when I finished. Adult children who've grown accustomed to financial support sometimes panic when that support is withdrawn. The competency angle is particularly troubling. What can I do to protect myself? Several things. First, we need to establish a clear record of your mental competency. I'll arrange for an independent psychological evaluation from Dr. Sarah Kim. She specializes in these cases, and her assessments carry significant legal weight. Relief flooded through me. How quickly can that happen? Tomorrow, if necessary. Second, we need to document your financial decision-making process. The credit card revocation, the travel plans, everything needs to look deliberate and rational rather than impulsive. I thought about my research into Grand Canyon tours, my careful consideration of travel options, my methodical approach to reclaiming my independence. I can provide that documentation. Good. Third, we should consider updating your power of attorney documents to explicitly prevent the kind of manipulation your daughter is attempting. She doesn't currently have power of attorney? Not unless you've signed something recently. But she's apparently claiming otherwise, which suggests she's either confused about the legal requirements or deliberately misrepresenting the situation. The second option seemed more likely given everything else that had happened. Lindsay wasn't confused. She was calculating. Robert, there's something else. They're trying to sell my house. Without your consent? That's impossible unless they have legal authority, which they don't. I'll call Marcus Chen directly and clarify that any such transaction would be fraudulent. After hanging up with Robert, I felt a mixture of relief and determination. Lindsay had underestimated me completely, assuming that the compliant father who'd funded her lifestyle for years would crumble under pressure. She'd forgotten that the same methodical thinking that had built my construction business was still functioning perfectly. I spent the afternoon organizing documentation that would prove my competency beyond any doubt. Bank statements showing careful financial planning, medical records indicating excellent health for my age, evidence of community involvement, volunteer work, ongoing friendships that demonstrated social engagement. Most importantly, I documented the timeline of Lindsay's financial dependence and my decision to end it. The pattern showed a rational response to manipulative behavior, not cognitive decline. My phone rang constantly throughout the day. Lindsay calling from various European numbers, Todd adding his voice to the chorus, even people I didn't recognize claiming to be concerned about my welfare. I let them all go to voicemail, creating a record of their harassment while maintaining my own calm demeanor. The voicemails told their own story, Lindsay's voice growing more shrill with each message, Todd making thinly veiled threats about legal action, strangers who'd somehow gotten my number offering services for elderly people with diminished capacity. The campaign was coordinated and aggressive, designed to create the impression that everyone was worried about my mental state. Everyone except me, apparently. That evening, I made myself a proper dinner and sat down to plan my response. Not a defensive reaction to their attacks, but a proactive strategy that would demonstrate exactly how sharp my thinking remained. I opened my laptop and began researching Lindsay's financial situation with the same thoroughness I'd once applied to construction projects. Public records, social media posts, professional networking sites. The picture that emerged was even worse than I'd suspected. Their mortgage was 3 months behind despite my regular payments. Todd's employment history showed a pattern of job losses and extended unemployment periods. Lindsay's income alone couldn't support their lifestyle, which explained their desperation when I'd cut off their funding. They weren't just trying to control my assets out of greed. They were trying to avoid financial ruin. The knowledge gave me leverage I hadn't expected to need, but was grateful to possess. When they returned from Europe with their intervention plans and competency challenges, I would be ready with facts they couldn't dispute or manipulate. I was still researching when my doorbell rang at 9:30. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Peterson from next door, holding what looked like a casserole dish and wearing an expression of concern. "Gary, I hope I'm not bothering you. I brought some of that chicken and rice you liked." I opened the door, grateful for normal human interaction after a day of defensive planning. "That's very kind of you, Helen. Come in." She followed me to the kitchen, setting the dish on my counter while glancing around with the subtle assessment of someone checking on a neighbor's welfare. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've been getting some strange phone calls, people asking about your health, whether I've noticed any concerning behavior." My jaw tightened. "What kind of people?" "Someone claiming to be your daughter, asking if I'd seen you acting confused or forgetful. Another person saying they were from a senior services organization, wanting to know if you needed assistance with daily activities." The manipulation was even more extensive than I'd realized. Lindsay was building a case not just with medical professionals, but with my neighbors and community, creating the impression that everyone was worried about my competency. "Helen, I want you to know that I haven't authorized anyone to inquire about my health or living situation. Anyone calling with those questions is overstepping their bounds." She nodded slowly. "I thought it seemed odd. You've always been the most organized person on the block. Your lawn is perfect, your house is immaculate, and you're sharper than people half your age. Thank you for saying that, and thank you for not giving them any information." "Of course not. Though I did tell the woman claiming to be your daughter that if she was really family, she'd know you well enough to ask you directly instead of interrogating neighbors." I smiled for the first time all day. "What did she say to that?" "She got very angry and hung up, which told me everything I needed to know about her motives." After Helen left, I sat in my kitchen eating her delicious casserole and feeling less alone than I had in weeks. Not everyone was susceptible to Lindsay's manipulation. Some people could still recognize the difference between genuine concern and calculated interference. My phone buzzed with another message, but instead of anxiety, I felt curiosity about what new angle they'd discovered. The text was from Lindsay's number, sent from whatever European city they were currently occupying. Dad, we've spoken with Dr. Morrison and several other medical professionals. They're all concerned about the pattern of behavior you've exhibited. The financial decisions, the isolation from family, the paranoid accusations. We're flying back tomorrow to help you get the care you need. Paranoid accusations. They were already reframing my accurate observations about their manipulation as symptoms of mental illness. Any resistance I offered would be evidence of my declining faculties. But I had something they didn't expect: documentation, legal representation, and the kind of strategic thinking that comes from years of successful business management. They'd assumed I would panic and crumble under pressure. Instead, I was planning the most important project of my life, the project of proving that independence wasn't a mental health issue, but a fundamental right that couldn't be revoked by people who preferred me controllable and compliant. I pulled out my phone and called Robert Harrison's emergency line. "Robert, they're coming back tomorrow. We need to accelerate everything." "Consider it done. Dr. Kim can see you first thing in the morning. I'll have preliminary legal documents ready by noon. And Gary?" "Yes?" "Don't let them in your house without me present. Once they're inside, they can claim they're providing necessary care and use that as evidence of your incapacity." The advice chilled me, but I understood its wisdom. My own home could become a trap if I wasn't careful about who I allowed inside and what they might claim about my condition. I spent the evening preparing my house like a fortress, important documents secured in my safe, emergency contacts updated to include Robert and Dr. Kim instead of Lindsay. A detailed timeline of recent events printed and organized for easy reference. Most importantly, I practiced staying calm under pressure. Whatever emotional manipulation they brought back from Europe, I would respond with facts and documentation rather than hurt feelings or defensive anger. They taught me that love could be weaponized. Now I was going to teach them that dignity could be defended. The morning of their return, I dressed carefully in my best suit and drove to Dr. Kim's office for the competency evaluation I'd requested. The assessment took 3 hours and covered everything from basic cognitive function to complex financial decision-making scenarios. Dr. Kim was thorough and professional, testing my memory, reasoning ability, and judgment with the kind of objective standards that couldn't be influenced by family politics or emotional manipulation. "Mr. Owens," she said as we concluded, "your cognitive function is excellent for any age, but particularly impressive for 68. Your recent financial decisions show clear reasoning and appropriate self-protection instincts. Anyone questioning your mental competency is either misinformed or motivated by factors other than your welfare." The written report would be ready by afternoon, complete with detailed test results that would demolish any claims about my mental decline. From Dr. Kim's office, I drove directly to Robert's law firm, where we finalized protective legal documents and reviewed strategy for the confrontation that was certainly coming. "Remember," Robert advised as I prepared to leave, "they'll try to make this emotional. Keep it factual. You're not defending your right to be independent. You're exercising it." I drove home feeling more prepared than I'd been for any challenge in years. My house was secure, my legal position was strong, and my mental competency was documented beyond dispute. Most importantly, I was no longer the confused, hurt father who'd been blindsided by their betrayal. I was a man who'd learned the difference between being loved and being used, and who'd chosen to demand better. Let them bring their intervention and their false concern and their manipulative medical opinions. I was ready. My phone buzzed at exactly 3:15 that afternoon with a text that made my blood run cold. "Dad, we're at your front door. We brought help." Through my living room window, I could see Lindsay's rental car in my driveway, along with a white sedan I didn't recognize. 3 figures stood on my porch: Lindsay, Todd, and a woman in professional attire carrying a leather briefcase. The intervention team had arrived. I took a deep breath, adjusted my tie, and opened the door with the calm confidence of someone who'd spent the morning proving his mental competency to a licensed psychologist. The contrast between my composed appearance and their travel-worn desperation was immediately apparent. "Hello, Lindsay. Todd." I nodded politely to the stranger. "And you are?" "Dr. Patricia Wells," the woman replied, extending her hand. "I'm a geriatric psychiatrist. Your daughter contacted me about some concerning behavioral changes." I shook her hand firmly, noting how she studied my face for signs of confusion or agitation. I see. Well, please come in. Though I should mention that my attorney will be joining us shortly. Lindsay's eyes flashed with irritation. Dad, this isn't a legal matter. This is about getting you the help you need. A funny thing about help, I said, leading them to my living room. I've discovered it means different things to different people. The living room felt smaller with 4 people in it, but I'd arranged the seating deliberately. They took the couch, sitting close together like a unified front, while I chose my leather armchair, the one that gave me the best view of all their faces and positioned me slightly higher than their eye level. Dr. Wells opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. Mr. Owens, your daughter has expressed some concerns about recent changes in your behavior. Impulsive financial decisions, social isolation, and what she describes as paranoid thinking. Has she now? I leaned back in my chair, completely relaxed. And what specific examples did she provide? Lindsay jumped in before Dr. Wells could respond. Dad, you cut off my credit card access without warning. You're planning expensive trips you can't afford. You're accusing us of manipulating you when all we've ever done is try to help. Interesting perspective. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Dr. Wells, would you say that monitoring one's own financial accounts represents paranoid thinking? She looked puzzled. Not at all. That's basic financial responsibility. Good to know. I showed her the screen displaying recent transactions. Because when I monitored my accounts last week, I discovered over $3,000 in charges from Paris, France, all made on a credit card I'd given my daughter for emergencies, during a vacation I wasn't invited to join. The silence was deafening. Dr. Wells looked from my phone to Lindsay with raised eyebrows. Todd shifted uncomfortably on the couch, his face reddening. Dad, those were legitimate travel expenses, Lindsay said weakly, for a family vacation that excluded family. I set my phone aside and looked directly at Dr. Wells. Doctor, in your professional opinion, would removing financial access from someone who's been using your credit cards without permission represent impulsive behavior or appropriate boundary setting? Dr. Wells was quiet for a long moment, clearly recalibrating her understanding of the situation. That would depend on the specific circumstances, but protecting one's assets from unauthorized use is generally considered prudent. My doorbell rang with perfect timing. Through the window, I could see Robert Harrison approaching with his own briefcase and the kind of confident stride that comes from years of winning difficult cases. That would be my attorney, I said, standing to answer the door. I hope you don't mind. I thought it would be helpful to have all perspectives represented. Robert entered with professional courtesy, introducing himself to everyone while assessing the room with the sharp eyes of someone trained to read group dynamics. He took the remaining chair, creating a more balanced arrangement that broke up their united front. I apologize for being late, Robert said, opening his briefcase. I was picking up some documentation that might be relevant to this discussion. He pulled out several folders. Dr. Kim's competency evaluation results, financial records dating back 5 years, and some interesting real estate documents. Lindsay's face went pale. What kind of real estate documents? Robert smiled pleasantly. Well, since we're all here discussing Mr. Owens's mental state and decision-making capacity, I thought it might be helpful to review some of his recent choices. For instance, his decision to sell the Maple Street property. The words hit the room like a bomb. Todd shot forward in his seat. What property on Maple Street? Your house, I said calmly. The one I purchased 2 years ago and never transferred to your names. Market conditions were excellent, so I sold it yesterday for a substantial profit. Lindsay's voice came out as a whisper. You sold our house? I sold my house, the one I bought that I paid for, that was titled in my name alone. I looked at Dr. Wells. Doctor, does selling one's own property at market value represent impaired judgment? She was staring at the documents Robert had spread across my coffee table. These show clear financial planning and market awareness. Nothing here suggests cognitive impairment. Todd erupted from the couch. Where the hell are we supposed to live? Our stuff is in that house. Was in that house, Robert corrected mildly. It's been moved to secure storage. First month's rent is paid. Lindsay began crying. Not the genuine tears of loss, but the calculated sobs she'd used since childhood when she wanted something. Dad, how could you do this to us? We're your family. Are we? I pulled out another folder. Because family doesn't usually exclude fathers from European vacations while using their credit cards to pay for luxury meals. Family doesn't try to have each other declared mentally incompetent to seize control of their assets. Dr. Wells looked up sharply. Is that what's happening here? Robert handed her a document. Mr. Owens's daughter contacted multiple people yesterday claiming to have power of attorney and seeking to have him placed in assisted living. She also attempted to list his property for sale without his knowledge or consent. The psychiatrist's expression shifted completely as she read the documentation. What had begun as a routine elder care assessment was revealing itself as something much more sinister. Dr. Wells, I said quietly, may I ask who contacted you about this evaluation? And who's paying for your services? She looked uncomfortable. Your daughter called me yesterday from Paris. She said it was an emergency situation requiring immediate intervention. She's arranged to pay my fees. I see. So the person who stands to benefit most from having me declared incompetent is also the one paying for the evaluation that would make that determination. Lindsay's tears stopped abruptly. That's not what this is about, isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you excluded me from a family vacation, used my money to pay for it, and when I finally said no to being treated that way, you decided to have me declared mentally unfit so you could control my assets. Robert cleared his throat. Dr. Wells, I think you should see these competency evaluation results. They were completed this morning by Dr. Sarah Kim, who specializes in elder care assessments. She read through the documents with growing amazement. These scores are exceptional. Memory, reasoning, judgment, financial planning, everything indicates excellent cognitive function. But he's acting irrationally, Lindsay protested weakly. Is he? Dr. Wells looked around the room, taking in my composed demeanor, the organized documentation, the clear timeline of events that Robert had presented. Because what I'm seeing is an elderly man who discovered his family was exploiting him financially and took appropriate steps to protect himself. Todd made one last desperate attempt. He's isolating himself from family. That's a warning sign of dementia. Or, I said, standing up and walking to my mantel where travel brochures were prominently displayed, it's a sign of someone who's finally ready to live for himself instead of being used by others. I picked up the Grand Canyon tour information and handed it to Dr. Wells. I'm planning a hiking trip to Arizona next month, solo travel at 68. Would you consider that evidence of mental decline or personal growth? She smiled for the first time since arriving. Given your excellent health and financial resources, I'd consider it admirable independence. The room fell silent except for the ticking of my grandfather clock. Lindsay and Todd sat deflated on my couch, their intervention collapsed, their manipulation exposed, their housing situation suddenly precarious. Dr. Wells packed her materials efficiently. Mr. Owens, I see no evidence whatsoever of cognitive impairment or diminished capacity. In fact, your recent decisions show excellent judgment and appropriate self-advocacy. She looked at Lindsay with barely concealed disapproval. I won't be submitting any recommendations for assisted living or conservatorship. After she left, Robert gathered his documents while Lindsay and Todd sat in stunned silence. What happens now? Lindsay asked, her voice small and defeated. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, seeing not the little girl I'd raised, but the woman who'd tried to steal my independence and dignity. Now you figure out how to take care of yourselves, like adults do. Dad, we're sorry. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. Can you? Because I'm not sure you understand what you've broken. Todd stood up, his face red with anger and humiliation. This isn't over. We'll find another way to prove you're not capable of making these decisions. Good luck with that, Robert said pleasantly. Because I'll be documenting any further harassment as elder abuse, which carries serious criminal penalties in this state. They left without another word, walking to their rental car with the defeated posture of people who'd gambled everything and lost completely. I stood at my window watching them drive away, feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone sat silent on the coffee table. No emergency calls, no guilt trips, no manipulation. Just blessed, liberating silence. Robert patted my shoulder as he prepared to leave. You handled that perfectly. They won't be bothering you again. What if they try something else? They won't. People like that are bullies, and bullies back down when someone stands up to them with documentation and legal representation. You've shown them you're not the easy target they thought you were. After he left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the evidence of my victory. Bank statements showing my financial independence, travel brochures promising adventures chosen for my own enjoyment, legal documents protecting my autonomy from those who would steal it. Most importantly, I had something I hadn't possessed in years, the absolute certainty that I was living my own life instead of funding someone else's. My phone buzzed with a text from the Grand Canyon Tour Company. Departure in 10 days, weather forecast excellent, prepare for the adventure of a lifetime. I smiled, already imagining myself standing on the rim of that ancient canyon, breathing air that belonged entirely to me, taking photographs for albums that would tell my story instead of serving someone else's narrative. At 68, I was finally free to discover who I was when I wasn't being what everyone else needed me to be. The adventure was just beginning. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Click the video on the left to hear another incredible story of someone who refused to let family take advantage of their kindness. Thanks for watching, and remember, it's never too late to choose yourself.